Channel 5. More news, more experience, more often.
You're watching CBS News' continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia, here is Dan Rather.
Here are the headlines of this hour. U.S. and allied troops begin the ground push into Kuwait and perhaps into southern Iraq. The Pentagon clamps a lid on virtually all news from the war zone. The French say that they're going to brief. Iraq answers with another Scud attack into Saudi Arabia. Part of a Scud hit a school in Riyadh. What President Bush calls now, quote, the final phase of Operation Desert Storm is well underway and unfolding on the desert that is the border between Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iraq. American and allied troops massed on the border between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. They've begun to move into occupied Kuwait. Details are hard to come by at this hour since the Pentagon has blacked out almost all information, saying that it did not in any way want to endanger U.S. troops. U.S. news organizations are cooperating. An Iraqi Scud missile struck the capital of Riyadh, the Saudi Arabian capital, doing some heavy damage to what appears to be a school. There are no reports of injuries in this latest missile attack on Riyadh. There are now reports that President Bush made up his mind some time ago that the moment of attack, if possible, could come on Saturday night, Eastern U.S. time. Among the reasons were what Mr. Bush called Iraq's scorched earth policy inside Kuwait. Latest reports from the Pentagon say that as many as 300 Kuwaiti oil wells may have been destroyed or are still burning. And our independent reporting, David Green, up on the border, has sent back some pictures of the Kuwaiti oil fields burning. Bob McEwen, who reached us by telephone as the ground war offensive began unfolding up there, reported the ground was shaking underneath him as artillery and the big guns of the battleships offshore pounded the border area. He also could see the bellowing smoke from the oil wells set aflame. Doug Tennell is in Amman, Jordan, monitoring Radio Baghdad. Doug, what are you hearing there?
Dan, we've just had first word from Radio Baghdad that the ground offensive is underway. The Iraqi radio has finally told Iraqis of what's beginning to happen. In a communique that interrupted their regular programming, a voice was heard to say the following, and I quote, "Dear brave fighters, you are now entering the mother of battles," using the phrase that Iraq has used to describe this war from the very beginning, but it seems to have taken on some new urgency. The communique said, You shall continue your strikes against, quote, the enemies of mankind. Iraqi men, it said, are not the type to make concessions. The radio broadcast also said that Iraq has been prepared for a day like this, a day never witnessed in history for a long time. The communique also said that, tell the enemy with your weapons, you shall fight with the simplest weapons against the most destructive. So we finally have from Baghdad Radio first word that the ground offensive is underway, Dan.
Thanks, Doug. David Martin is at the Pentagon. David?
Dan, just a short while ago, you and Eric Engberg were talking about the seizure of this island called Failaka Island at the mouth to Kuwait Harbor. And I guess this is typical of the kind of confusion we're going to have in the coming days during this news blackout when no official information is available. My information is that this island was actually seized, or a good portion of it was actually seized on Friday. And that was again confirmed to me as early as Saturday morning. Yet now the Kuwaiti news agency is reporting the seizure of that island as if it had just been taken. So we have conflicting reports here that vary a span of 2 days over exactly when that island was taken. And I think that is the kind of stuff we're going to have during these next 48 hours. Susan Spencer in Riyadh mentioned that she had been told that there would be a news blackout for 48 hours. That is exactly the time period that officials here have been talking about for the last several weeks, saying that they had to keep the movements of some units secret for 48 hours so they could get where they were supposed to go. So we are going to be at the mercy of rumors and half-truths as long as this blackout continues. But I have to tell you that the calls I've been getting here, somebody in the Pentagon gave out the number here. The calls I've been getting here, it doesn't seem to bother the American people at all.
Well, and understandably so. It may be worth mentioning that even if Saddam Hussein had the Allied plan, even if he had it up on his wall in his bunker, it's doubtful he could do very much to counter it, according to U.S. and other Allied commanders here, because he is fixed. He's made his bet on dug-in defensive positions, and General Schwarzkopf and his forces are moving and plan to keep moving as part of the effort to keep constant pressure on Saddam Hussein's forces and to outflank them. Dr. Bob Arnott has been trying to keep us up to date on the medical aspects of the war, what preparations and what planning has been made. Once casualties began, it is inevitable. Americans, we know, are fighting in situations now where some will be killed and some wounded. How does the evacuation procedure work?
It's a little different from Vietnam. We learned about the golden hour there, that hour where if you can pluck somebody from the battlefield, take them to a hospital, you can probably save their life. In Vietnam, with very brave pilots, they could go right almost to the site of the battle. The fear here is that because you have the flat open expanse, because you're so exposed that it's going to be difficult to get all the way up to the front. Now here we see a patient loaded into a helicopter. We filmed this before the war actually began. We spent a day with one of the helicopter companies. See the terrain here, Dan? They have to fly at maybe 50 feet over the ground. There's tremendous danger to these pilots. They have radar altimeters to look down, but they may miss with the abrupt dune coming up. There have been 4 helicopter accidents so far. Some of these may be due to weather conditions. They're trying to put in new navigational equipment, but the bottom line is that these are some of the bravest people in the theater. They're willing to fly. And I found out the other day that they're going out there at 16 feet over the desert because there's missile lock at 16 feet. They'll actually go down to 4 feet to try and get out of it. So you can imagine 100 miles an hour over the desert, terrain you can't see, flying at night, trying to save lives. The problem is, of course, that some lives unfortunately have been lost of these very brave aviators and of the passengers that they have taken with them. But it is a tremendous effort, and we expect that the helicopter evacuation system is going to be a big part of getting these young men back in that golden hour to save their lives.
Thanks, Dr. Bob Arnott. As helicopters are an integral part of the attack, the Iraqis, remember, are in fixed defense positions, and even if they had our campaign plan, they couldn't do much to change the course of events. They can only guess, as we did earlier, about the way the campaign might unfold. And indeed, U.S. military sources have been putting out a lot of information about the campaign, how it could unfold, as part of their campaign to, 1, convince Saddam Hussein what a powerful force he's facing, and 2, to keep him guessing. Of course, only General Norman Schwarzkopf and his top staff knows for sure which way the great Allied ground offensive is going to unfold in coming hours. Let's go now to Esme Murphy of WCCO-TV, who's with a support group of families for servicemen. Esme?
Well, Dan, this small apartment in Eden Prairie, Minnesota has become something of a command center of sorts for the families and loved ones of 4 servicemen in the Gulf. Danette Lehman is with us now. Her husband is a combat engineer with the Army. Danette, I know you're concerned that your husband is on the front lines. What are your thoughts right now?
I'm scared for him, and I hope he does a good job. They should have went in, and I believe in what they're doing. And I just pray that they all make it out safe.
Thank you, Danette. Julie Steen's husband, Kevin, is an artilleryman with the Army in Saudi Arabia. What are your thoughts right now?
Relief and fear and just ready to go in, get it done, and come home.
There was a lot of talk with the Soviet initiatives and also last-minute flurries at the United Nations that possibly there could be some more negotiations, yet we went ahead with the ground war. What are your thoughts about that? Should we have waited, or should we have gone ahead with the ground war?
No, they absolutely did the right thing. They were stalling for time. They scudded Saudi and Israel. They gave up their right to the 12 o'clock time. They were messing with us. They went in, they did it, and they got it done.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Okay, thank you, Julie. And Christina Grotberg's husband is with the Marine Corps in Saudi Arabia. With her also is Mark Grotberg, who's only 2 months old. He was not even alive when his husband, when his father left for Saudi Arabia. Christina, what are your thoughts right now?
Well, we're in shock what happened, but we know we knew it was going to happen. We're behind our husbands 100%, and we're scared, but yet we we know that if our husbands were here, they wouldn't want us to be scared. We know that that's what they're there for, is to defend our, you know, we just know that's what they're there for.
Okay, thank you very much. This small group of women has been together for several days now, watching news reports, trying to comfort each other, and that's really the way they've been getting through this, going through it together. And while it takes obviously a lot of bravery to be on the front lines and fighting in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, it also takes a lot of bravery to have to watch it all unfold on television. Dan, back to you in Saudi Arabia.
Thanks. If it's any consolation, and it may not be, General Norman Schwarzkopf and his commanders have long made it clear that the Iraqis, once the ground war has started, will be under constant pressure. The kind of constant pressure they had during the air war has now been increased as the land offensive begins to unfold. Unrelenting pressure is the secret to the Allied attack success and is the key to getting a quick victory if there can be such a thing. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
What do you look forward to? Dating, driving, sports, graduation? Alcohol can damage your health, grades, your social life. Alcohol-related highway accidents are the biggest killer of America's teenagers. And the younger you start using it, the more likely you'll become addicted to it. You have a lot to look forward to. Don't let alcohol ruin what you want most. A message from the National Citizens Commission on Alcoholism.
Randy Travis on strings. Branford Marsalis on the horn. Paul Schaefer on keys. Carly Simon on lead. There are a lot of different parts to play in the American Red Cross. Play your part.
When your father and I were married, sex was a very different thing.
I can tell by looking at her what she's gonna say.
We dated for a while before he even had the nerve to kiss me.
They went to a soda fountain and shared a straw. Oh, true love.
Well, to my mind, you kids have so much more to deal with than we ever even had to think about.
So much for the intro. Here comes the good stuff.
Sex is a natural thing between two people who love each other.
Fast forward through pregnancy and nice young men.
A young man who will respect you and who will...
Fast forward through marriage and babies.
To become a happy and joyous mother.
And now for the closing remarks.
AIDS is one of them.
Whoa.
There are risks in becoming sexually active. AIDS is one of them. Teresa, let's start at the beginning. HIV is the name of the virus that causes AIDS.
We can help you talk about AIDS. Call for a guide.
Synchronization, very important at this hour as the Allied ground offensive rolls on. The United States and its allies are trying to achieve a combat power advantage by the properly timed arrival and concentration of forces at decisive points. And while we don't know where those decisive points are, everybody said going in, from General Schwarzkopf on down, that the synchronization of the attack will be critical to its success, particularly in the early hours and days. Let's go to New York now, where Congressman Robert Torricelli is joining us. Congressman, thanks for being with us. Do you think there's any doubt that Congress will back all of this, even when the casualties begin coming in, which has to be fairly soon now?
I think, Dan, that Saddam Hussein has succeeded in uniting both the Congress and the country to an extent that has rarely, if ever, been seen. The combination of his Scud missile attacks, the oil in the Persian Gulf, and now what appears to be a virtual genocide in Kuwait City, I think have let people know of something about who we're dealing with and the fact that what is being done really is something for which we had no choice.
And what about the danger of a wider war?
Well, Dan, I think that at this point, the way the administration has handled the coalition and communication with other nations in the region, there is some considerable confidence in George Bush personally and in the administration. During these next few days, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any real divisions in the Congress or in the government generally about how this is being conducted.
Now, this was the case in the early stages of the Vietnam War as well, and we know that later it, to say the least, got frayed around the edges. Your assessment of what the chances are of that happening this time?
Well, we went through months of members of Congress trying to create every possible analogy with Vietnam, but from the performance of the military to international support, none of them have held. And my guess is at this point there are less and less people talking about Vietnam and more talking about other analogies in history. We've been far more successful in recognizing that, that this is one where this country's holding together and performing well.
Congressman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Storylines of the hour. The Allied ground offensive well underway now. It began on President Bush's orders about 5 hours ago. President Bush vows that Iraq will be, quote, swiftly and decisively driven out of Kuwait. Baghdad's only known response, a Scud missile fired at Saudi Arabia. The Pentagon has shrouded this final phase of Operation Desert Storm in secrecy, understandably so. Details are hard to come by. There are some battlefield reports. As Allied tanks and artillery opened fire all along the war front, the Kuwaiti news agency reported the capture of a small island commanding the sea approaches to Kuwait City. This gives more validity to reports that a marine amphibious landing might be near, but there's some belief that that could turn out to be a feint or some kind of diversionary action. Inside Saudi Arabia, Patriot interceptors brought down a Scud missile. The debris caused some damage in Riyadh, but so far as we know, no injuries. At the United Nations, Iraq's ambassador predicted a long, tough fight and said his country will, quote, never surrender. Britain's domestic news agency, the Press Association, reported that the Allied forces were engaged in a complicated series of diversionary tactics and feint assaults to deceive Iraqi commanders. This is all part of General Schwarzkopf's plan of keep him guessing, keep on the move. Arab military sources in Riyadh, reached by telephone from Bahrain, said the coalition forces pushed in 3 assaults from land and sea into Kuwait and 1 from Saudi Arabia into southern Iraq. These sources spoke on condition that they not be identified. Bob Schieffer joins us now with our military consultants. Bob?
Hearing Congressman Torricelli talk about Congress trying to draw analogies between Vietnam and Saudi Arabia, certainly it is hard to imagine, General Bob Wagner, 2 battlefields more different than the battlefield in Vietnam and the battlefield where this enormous operation is taking place. You were in Vietnam. It's a much different ballgame.
It absolutely is.
We have taken, CBS News has put together an animation display showing what that battlefield looks like, working with models and a lot of special effects and the modern television technology. We're going to take a look at it now just to talk about what this battlefield looks like. And what we have, 2,000 tanks, I guess.
That's right, 2,000 tanks, 2,000 M1A1 Abrams tanks.
And those flat top vehicles there, what are those, General?
Those are scissor bridges, AVLBs, that will take us over these tank obstacles that we hope we don't face.
And these are some very difficult obstacles for a tank to overcome. I think the first one we're going to see on this animation as the camera moves across the desert floor here is what we've come to know as a berm, this piled up sand. Now, General, I want to ask you, when we're all little boys playing with tanks in the sand pile, the tank goes over a pile of sand like that. Why do you want to go through that rather than over it?
Because when you play that game, Bob, you have a weak underbelly, and that round can take you out.
So that's when a tank is most vulnerable.
That's
when
right,
it's up
and it also
over.
slows up that momentum I was talking about.
Now here is another of the obstacles. These are these huge ditches, sometimes filled with oil, we're told, that can be set afire. As the tank goes past that, then comes the barbed wire. Is that a problem for a tank to go through?
Barbed wire is not much of a problem, but usually in that barbed wire you'll have a lot of anti-tank mines.
And that's what we saw.
And that's what you have next, and then of course you run into the major positions. But this kind of position, you would divide your task force into 3 teams. You have a breaching team, fundamentally engineers, dismounted probably to go in and detonate this. Then you have your support team, direct fire, tanks backed up, firing at the enemy, indirect fire and air going in, and then your assault team, so when they effect a penetration, you zoom through at flank speed to get through as soon as possible. But the best thing to do is get around these things and force them to pull out.
Now, what we're seeing here is, of course, the prize, and this is where the enemy forces are concentrated. Back in here, they have their artillery. We're told that in this network of ditches and bunkers, some of them are concrete reinforced. Once you get there, what do? You just charge in with the tanks, General?
Once you effect a penetration, you charge in. The thing that we can do at speeds is fire as accurately as we can as a move. So mobility in a situation like that is very important. But this is sort of a Maginot Line complex. Those kinds of fortifications don't work. We will get around most of those fortifications and we will force him out of them. This is really our basic battle plan.
Not very much like Vietnam.
No, sir.
All right. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Bob. Quoting Britain's domestic news agency, this is a British report now, the U.S. 2nd Marine Division and the 18th Airborne Corps have both stormed over the border into eastern Kuwait, and to the west, U.S. Army troops moved into Iraq in a flanking operation. This is according to the British Press Association. If this is true, you can bet that as those armor units move into southern Iraq, they have it in what the truck drivers call the company hole. The whole idea, which is to say the fastest gear they have, because the whole idea is to keep moving unrelenting pressure on the Iraqis and keep them guessing, which General Schwarzkopf so far has been able to do. Eric Ingberg is here with another report from the front. Eric?
Dan, we're getting a little bit of a feel now for what it was like in the hours just before H hour. We've heard from our own Bob McEwen, who was the first reporter, I think, to report the activities of the American troops on the eastern part of this front. Now pool reports from some of the officially sanctioned Pentagon newspaper and television and radio pools are beginning to arrive here. And one of the things that I guess won't surprise old veterans is that even though they've been 6 months in the field, it came as a surprise to these troops when they got the order to move to the front. Now, these are units of the 82nd Airborne Division getting ready to move to their jump-off points. The pool reports indicate that the orders to move to some of these units came early Friday, and that they had to get all of their equipment together very rapidly and move to the point where the assault was to begin. One pool report says, just behind these front lines, the desert crawled Saturday with thousands of trucks carrying semi-trailer loads of artillery shells, along with thousands of gallons of fuel and water at one improvised road to the front. Dan?
Eric, we'll get back in a moment with more of that reporting direct from the front, but right now we're going to take a break as our CBS News coverage of the ground war offensive continues. Stay here with us. Dan Rather live from Saudi Arabia with Eric Ingberg. Eric, you were talking about those trucks. What's called the Camel Express, the kind of thing it was called in World War II, the Red Ball Express, critical to General Schwarzkopf and the other commanders, General Calvin Waller, able to keep, in their being able to keep this immense flanking operation through southern Iraq rolling. Those tanks can go a long way, but only if the fuel and the ammunition keeps up with them. It's not only a case of the trucks rolling, and there were big flatbed trucks and big tanker trucks, bumper to bumper all along that border, we know. But as soon as possible, of course, the Allies will be establishing some air bases inside Kuwait, perhaps even inside Iraq itself, in order to keep the fuel and ammunition going, because those armor units going as fast as they can. The whole idea is to keep moving, keep them guessing. They can only go as far as their supply line, logistics behind them keep up. Saddam Hussein's options, we've talked about what the U.S. options are. Among his options, he can fight for Kuwait and lose. He can request a ceasefire, and if the United States and his allies agree, he'll withdraw from Kuwait as directed. Saddam Hussein, if we don't agree to a ceasefire, could surrender all forces in the battle area. By now, Saddam Hussein, by all objective measurements, must know he has lost. His survival is in jeopardy. So one of the questions is, how long will he wait? How long can he wait? Joining us now is Dr. Turkan, the science advisor to King Hussein. Doctor, thank you for being with us. Your reaction to what's happened so far?
Well, first of all, obviously, we were disappointed because we had pinned a lot of hopes on the peace talks that were, or the peace, let's say, hopes, let's say, that was taking place between the Soviet Union and Iraq. But according to your question, Dan, as to how long, well, you know, the Iraqis, I think they will put up a fight, and it will take quite a while. And unfortunately, there will be a lot of casualties, as we can see.
You and others in Jordan have talked about what you see as the tragedy of the American air attacks. What about what Saddam Hussein is doing in Kuwait? He invaded the country, a smaller country that never was no threat to him. He conquered it, occupied it, and then savaged it with the evidence everywhere. He set these oil wells afire, and there's a roundup of people going on inside Kuwait.
Well, obviously, we've been hearing a lot of that as well, in addition as to seeing the after effects or the fallout of the continuous aerial bombardment of Iraq. Now, you know, Dan, there's a lot of interpretations, there's a lot of information, misinformation in these situations. This is what you might call always in the fog of war, fog of information. The whole point is that could we have solved this problem peacefully and diplomatically? His Majesty King Hussein started that in the first week of August, if you, as you recall. But then, unfortunately, events have built up to this point. The damage is done. Really, basically, it's all water under the bridge at the moment. It's just how can we now try to avert as more casualties and more destructiveness in this part of the world? And then we have to start looking at the next phase. I honestly hope that people are looking at the next phase of it. If this continues on for a while, let's say the frustration, hostility towards the West, what effect would that take place? This is not, we think here, this is not really a technical or a military, let's say, solution to the problem. This has to be solved politically for the long-term regional security of this region.
Very quickly now, because we have only a few seconds left, when the war ends, whenever and however it ends, will Jordan stay together pretty much as it is now, or will it inevitably be split?
Well, actually, I think Jordan will stay, and His Majesty and the people are behind His Majesty, and I think His Majesty is going to play a large role in this sense because of his experience and his respect in the region, and he's the only one that can deal, I think, with Arab problems as well as Palestinian, as well as with the West.
Doctor, thank you very much for being with us. The Allied forces on the move, confirmed by British sources and also by Arab sources. The British Press Association, the British troops are known to be with the main U.S. and Allied attack force, the one that's going to try to run that rapid flanking movement. Where it goes and exactly what directions it will take is what the Iraqis have to guess. There's one school of thought, one option open to General Schwarzkopf is to drive all the way to the Euphrates River inside southern Iraq, and in that way cut off all effort to resupply even the Republican Guard, which is down in that corner of Iraq that borders on Kuwait. All of that unfolding out in the desert in a news blackout by the Americans, the British, the French, and the Arabs are obviously not observing that news blackout, as Defense Secretary Cheney said that the U.S. is putting on the news blackout to protect forces so far as they could be protected, and we're respecting that and doing what we can not to pinpoint the exact location of any forces. Our CBS News coverage of the war in the Gulf, now including a ground war, will continue in a moment.
This is CBS.
Driving the right truck means a lot to a man. I mean, it's got to be a man's truck, like this GMC Sierra.
The full-size pickup with the highest resale value plus the most V6 power.
GMC Sierra treats me like a king. If I could find a woman like that.
Sierra, with $500 cash back as low as $11,315.
Someday that gal will be standing next to me and I'll be ready.
Now at your Central Tennessee GMC truck dealer.
From Walt Disney Pictures, he left home a boy. But in the face of disaster, he showed the courage of a man.
Let's go!
Triumphed over the impossible.
After them!
And he became a hero.
Fire! We did it! Chart this ship for Calcutta! Aye, aye, Captain!
Shipwrecked, rated PG.
Starts Friday. You're watching WTVF Nashville.
Watching CBS News continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia, here is Dan Rather.
During the Korean War, Incheon, a landmark battle. During the Vietnam War, the Tet Offensive, a landmark battle. Now, as we speak, in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and southern Iraq, a landmark battle, the decisive battle of the Persian Gulf War. Here are the headlines at this hour. Allied forces are reported now well into Kuwait, just hours after the ground war began. The president tells the nation he has complete confidence in the coalition forces. The ground trembles from the giant guns of American battleships. The Pentagon has clamped a lid on just about all information from the front to protect American lives, it said. The British and the French are not observing it. Arab military sources report that U.S. troops are at least 18 miles inside Kuwait at one point. Those are Marine forces. That was within 2 hours of the launch of the ground war. That's in the direction of Kuwait City. It was just 3 hours ago that President Bush told the American people the last phase of Operation Desert Storm has begun.
Final phase. I have complete confidence in the ability of the coalition forces swiftly and decisively to accomplish their mission.
Not all of the action is on the ground. CBS News correspondent Bob McEwen, who is near the Kuwaiti border with Saudi Arabia, near the Persian Gulf, reports the huge 16-inch guns of the battleships Missouri and Wisconsin and these are his words from the front, making the ground beneath us rumble. Let's go to Mark Phillips at the White House. Mark, what's the latest there?
Well, Dan, in fact, the news clampdown on this war extends even as far as here. The White House is effectively, at least the press office part of it, is effectively closed for the evening. The next place we expect to see President Bush is as he attends church tomorrow morning, presumably to do what he counseled all Americans to do, which is to pray for the troops now in action on the ground in the Gulf. What has emerged here over the course of the evening is just how much this plan was, in fact, a pre-plan. In fact, there wasn't so much an order that went out of here today to initiate this action. It would have taken an order to stop the action. General Schwarzkopf in the Gulf had a plan ready to go. This was the evening which he had told the president that he wanted most to initiate this action. The plan was to have this action, in fact, go ahead as scheduled unless there was an order from here for that not to happen. There was a good deal of diplomatic toing and froing today. The president was on the phone to various members of the coalition. There was a call here today as well from the president of the Soviet Union, Mr. Gorbachev, asking the president, in fact, to do what he could to try to delay this action for another day or two. The word that went back was a very diplomatically couched response, which was effectively that the coalition had decided on its course of action and was going to execute that course of action, and that's just what we're seeing now. Dan?
David Martin's at the Pentagon. David?
Dan, we're focusing on the ground war tonight for obvious reasons, but I think it's important to point out to people that the air war is continuing. These literally 2,500 or more combat missions that are flown every day, those are going on as well. And in fact, in the few public comments that Defense Secretary Cheney and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Colin Powell, have made about the battle plan, they talk about the ground offensive as simply a means of making the air war more effective by forcing the Iraqi army to come out of its fortifications and expose itself to airstrikes. So this is very much what the military calls a combined arms operation. And you can imagine, or perhaps we really can't imagine, what it would be like for an Iraqi soldier right now. Whatever is left of his communications is undoubtedly being jammed by American electronics. So he doesn't know what's happening except this rain of fire is coming in on him. And he's got two choices. Sit there in his fortification and be overrun, or come out, try to move, and expose himself to even more deadly fire. It's a very cruel situation for the Iraqi army.
One reason that U.S. forces, and General Schwarzkopf made this clear from the beginning, will be moving with main forces. That's the central part of the battle now, but also be using deep forces put in deep into Iraq. Where is for Saddam Hussein to guess. But that's part of what the 82nd Airborne and the 101st Airborne are about. When General Schwarzkopf decides to do it and where he decides to do it, to be part of the deep attack, which will be out front of the main force attack. Let's talk about how Iraq may fight the war. Bob Schieffer has prepared this report.
To give us a better understanding of this desert warfare and just what it entails, joining us our military consultant, retired Marine General George Crist. General Crist, first give us a brief overview of the battle area.
Bob, these red lines that you see on the map represent 170 miles of Iraqi fortifications and trenches, some 30 miles deep. Now, each one of these red lines looks very, very much like the model that we have here in front of us.
So let's talk about that. This sand piled up, what we've come to know as the berms, these are the Iraqi tanks behind it. Then what's in front?
Well, right here, of course, are the final protection. In fact, they live in bunkers inside these sand berms. In front, protecting them, are extensive minefields with wire. Beyond that, an anti-tank ditch to keep the tanks from getting down to them. And beyond that, another large sand pile, or berm as we call it, which is designed, again, to keep the infantry and the tanks from being able to come straight in.
Now, to give us an even better picture of this, we have some rare film taken during the Iran-Iraq War.
Bob, these are pictures shot during the Iran-Iraq War, and we're looking at an Iraqi tank from the Iranian side. That tank is out in the open, much the same as we're going to see their tanks out. Now, he's coming under fire. You see the artillery fire. Here goes an RPG shooting at him, and he's going to try to hide. And he's going behind one of those sand berms that we're talking about that they, too, will use to protect their tank from our fire. And now he's completely hidden, as you can see. We can't get a shot at him.
Now, General, you talked about sometimes the Iraqi soldiers actually live in these berms. We have some photos of that now. Let's look at that.
Hey, Bob, here very clearly in the background, you can see the big sand berm, and built into them are these bunkers. You notice they're sandbagged, built right in the side. This is an observation post that they built on top of, right on top of the berm. It's been, of course, hit and blown away. Here you get another good picture of how they build in sandbags on the front so that the artillery fire won't get them when they're in there. Here's one that unfortunately took a direct hit. The occupant seems to have not survived the direct hit. That's unfortunate if you're inside the bunker. Here's a little bit better one, and that shows a really good picture. See, again, the sandbags build up, corrugated tin on the top, sand at the top of it, so there's no way that you can get hit in that thing unless you get a direct hit.
General, you lived through some artillery attacks, I understand, in Korea and bunkers just like that. What was that like?
Well, my bunker was stronger than the one you saw, Bob, and I was scared as hell.
This whole idea of trench warfare is not a very pleasant way to spend the day. We have some more tape of the Iran-Iraq War.
Here you see on top of one of those berms an anti-tank rifle firing, and right down below it is the trench, and you can see these men are in their gas masks and protective equipment, much the same, I think, as the Iraqi troops would be if they use it on us. Now you see the inside of the trench itself. It's dirty, it's filthy. The men, you can see, they're dirty, probably have lice, junk sitting on the bottom of the trenches, as it always is, everything you throw away. Not a pleasant way to spend your day. Now, here's the incoming sort of artillery in on those trenches, what you hear, and here's the forward observers now that are calling the fire back out against them. Again, your average diamond trench. Now, here's a trench after battle, and it does look like it. The rifle, the gas mask, the dead body, the kind of thing you always see after a good, solid engagement in a trench.
Marine General George Crist, our consultant. Thank you, General.
Let's check in now with David Dow, who is outside Camp Pendleton, California, and he has a report on the mood of one community.
Any Saturday night. Home of the Camp Pendleton Marines. But inside, all eyes were on the televised war coverage. News of the long-awaited ground campaign brought a change to the setting and support for President Bush. The thoughts were of friends or relatives in the Gulf as the president called for prayer.
May God bless and protect each and every one of them, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Our hearts are with them, and our souls are with them, and I want them all to come home safely and peacefully. I want it to be over.
We're a military town, and we have a lot of friends that are over there, and we're concerned for them, and just hope that it's over as soon as possible. I think we're doing the right thing.
A lot of tension inside, but behind the president 100%.
When Marine Sergeant Thomas Flack left for the Gulf last August, he left behind his wedding plans and fiancé Don Iliescu.
I knew it was going to come to this, and I try to be as strong as I can.
Trish Harvey was married 1 month before her husband was sent to the Gulf. Tonight she watched amid reports that he and other members of the 1st Marine Division were in the thick of the new ground campaign.
Truthfully, he was just scared. He really didn't want to be there, but it's his job. To him, it's going over there. He's going to go over there, do his job as a Marine, and then come home.
Tonight, Marine families face the same prospect as the rest of us. A long period with little official information about the mounting ground offensive. They had been told to expect that. They're finding it a difficult necessity to live with. Dan?
This is not an election, but if preliminary results mean anything, it will be the Allies by a landslide. 1, dramatic victories in every battle in which we have reports. 2, the Iraqis simply have no air cover. But the stiffest test is yet to come. Out there in the desert somewhere, General Schwarzkopf thinks he knows exactly where is the Republican Guard, Saddam Hussein's last hope, his only hope for a victory of any significance. Joining us now is Dr. Hussan al-Sanad, who is Kuwait's Deputy of Information. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate you being here. What can you tell us about what's happening and what we can look for in the coming hours and days?
Well, to us, the events unfolding in the past few hours are very important events. We've been waiting for it for 6 months, and as we see it, following it, minute by minute, hour by hour, we are seeing the end of the occupation of our land, the beginning of the liberation of Kuwait, freeing it from the tyrant in Baghdad. And what we are hearing is good news, such as the liberation of Failaka Island, which is the one of the populated islands in Kuwait. And we are looking forward to the unfolding events in the few today and tomorrow.
What are you hearing about the oil well fires that have been set by Saddam Hussein's forces?
We've been hearing a lot. We've been hearing that he is systematically setting them on fire. Actually, we had information much earlier, about 2 or 3 months ago, that he mined all the oil fields in Kuwait, waiting for this desperate minute and last move. So here it is. He started setting them on fire. But unfortunately, they kept lying to the world that it is the doing of the Allied forces.
But we just heard a gentleman, a respected scholar in Jordan, say, actually he suggested, he didn't outright say, that a lot of this is just propaganda. There's talk of Saddam setting oil wells afire and arresting people and executing people. Address yourself to that, please.
Well, I understand exactly what he's saying because I've been in Jordan last month, and I am a Kuwaiti. I have been in Kuwait when the Iraqi troops invaded. I'm proud to be an Arab. I'm proud to be a Muslim. I'm proud to be a Kuwaiti. My response to this colleague in Jordan, that he is ignorant, he's deceiving himself, just like the Iraqi leader and the Iraqi Ba'ath regime is deceiving their people. We've seen them being bounded, their planes being destroyed, and they are claiming hundreds of planes of the Allies are being shut down. This is the whole world is seeing it. Unfortunately, they don't want to see facts and of life. What is happening? What is happening exactly is an aggression upon peaceful country, a reign of terror that's been going on for 6 months, being escalated the last 2 weeks. People were rounded up from the streets. Just last night, we heard the news from Kuwait that they were taking people, anyone in the street, any Kuwaiti in the street, they are picking them up. Just 2 days ago, they rounded people after a Friday prayer. They are coming out of the ceremony. They rounded them up in buses and trucks. So my response to him, that I did get in my hand, I have a proof of it also, report from Jordan itself, some Palestinian friends of mine whom I have taught in Kuwait University. They worked in the oil industry in Kuwait. They gave me reports about detailed report about the mining of the oil in the fields. We have it, and I have sent it to my government when I came back from Jordan.
So it isn't propaganda, it's fact.
I know it is for sure, it's fact, and I have been these people when they came over to my country, rampaging.
Thank you very much for being with us. We hope you will be back in your country and home again soon.
Thank you very much
for being with us. As the ground war offensive rumbles, here are headlines of the hour. President Bush declares the war to liberate Kuwait has, quote, entered a final phase. U.S. and allied ground forces are reported advancing into occupied Kuwait and maneuvering in southern Iraq. Baghdad remains officially silent. A single Scud missile has been fired at Saudi Arabia. Allied ground forces are said to be moving rapidly northward on at least 4 fronts. Now, this comes from Arab sources and from British sources. Some units plunging up to 18 miles into Kuwait, other units going into southern Iraq. All of this within the first 2 hours of the offensive that was launched about 5 hours ago. These reports come from Saudi and British sources. The Pentagon, under its new rules, refuses to comment. As the attack began, the Kuwaiti news agency reported that the small island that was referred to earlier near Kuwait City was captured with the surrender of some 500 to 1,000 Iraqi soldiers. The UN Security Council met briefly late last night, but the meeting broke up after 20 minutes, delegates saying ceasefire efforts were being abandoned. Now, numbers can tell a story. They can mean something. We're talking about, we mentioned there, the report that as the Marines invaded with an amphibious assault that island that controls the access to Kuwait City, that they took 500 to 1,000 prisoners. The number of prisoners taken early in this ground war will give us a good indication of how tough or how easy the task of liberating Kuwait is going to be. The early indications are that a lot of prisoners are being taken. Joining us now is Lieutenant Colonel Ronan Grissom, the Israeli Army spokesman. Colonel, first of all, I hope that I pronounced your name correctly. Thank you for being with us. What do you know about what's going on inside the offensive?
Well, we know as much as you do, or perhaps even a little less. Of course, we keep abreast of the developments. All I can say right now is that we congratulate Allied forces for taking this move at this stage, and we hope that they prosecute this phase of the war as successfully as they have done the first phase of the air operations.
Colonel, you have so much combat experience. What should we look for in the coming hours and days? What will be the telltale signs of how the battle is going?
Well, I would say that I would be very cautious in trying to draw conclusions from past battle, past combat to what is happening right now in the Gulf. This is a different war, different technology, superior air power, which is in full control, devastating artillery power of Allied forces. So it would be very premature to give now an assessment. What I do believe is that U.S. and Allied forces will be able to use all those advantages in order to shorten the war, to minimize casualties, and avoid the direct contact which was so evident in past wars in the Korea and World War II. And I'm sure all these elements were taken into consideration when this ground offensive was planned.
What about your own forces? What are they doing as this Allied ground attack grinds into Kuwait and southern Iraq?
Well, what I can say about Israel in general, that we woke up to another morning of what we call an emergency routine. And after consultation, which were taking place in the Defense Ministry throughout the night, we decided still to resume normal life in Israel today. And all the schools were open. People went back to work. Of course, our forces are in a high state of alert and readiness to meet any new developing contingencies. But as of now, we don't see any increase in the threat dimensions that we faced for the past 38 days of this campaign. So we will, as you say, roll with the punches and continue with our emergency routine. And of course, if there are new developments and new threats emerging, we'll be prepared to meet them.
Colonel, thanks for being with us. Good luck. Our CBS News coverage of the ground offensive here in and around the Persian Gulf continues.
The next step, ground war or peace? Can a deal be hammered out? What will the U.S. accept? Watch Defense Secretary Dick Cheney face the nation with Leslie Stahl Sunday.
We fought World War I to make the world safe for democracy. Are we fighting this war to make the world safe for the Kuwaiti royal family? Will the same old princes still be wallowing in the same old luxury? Or are they ready to trade a little royalty for a little democracy? 60 Minutes is with them at their capital in exile. Watch 60 Minutes, Sunday.
Trapped in a real-life nightmare of multiple personalities.
It's like having amnesia, not knowing who you are.
There's only one way out, a harrowing journey through her own past. The Many Faces of Marcia, a special 48 hours, Wednesday at 10, 9 Central and Mountain.
She loved him, maybe too much.
You can't go for murder without bodies.
Then find the bodies. Now, she has two choices.
If you don't take the stand on your own behalf, you're going to prison.
Let him confront the death penalty.
What happened on that island?
Or face it herself.
Tell me.
And the sea will tell. Sunday. Two horse breeders in a bitter feud. Did one help the other kick the bucket?
This is one tip that came straight from the horse's mouth.
An all-new Murder, She Wrote, Sunday.
I'm Charles Carroll. The water's running out in California. Time for drastic measures? Join us this Sunday morning.
The Salvation Army, serving the needs of the world through the years.
Pressure, pressure, pressure. Pressure, the name of the war game that General Norman Schwarzkopf is applying to Saddam Hussein's forces. Combat aircraft continue to leave this area here at Dahran. You can hear them in the background during our broadcast. They continue to leave in great numbers for points north. From the outside, the campaign to free Kuwait appears to be going like clockwork. Obviously the result of careful planning and preparation. The results so far speak for themselves. One of the important things to watch as General Schwarzkopf's plan unfolds is his desire, his absolute determination to stay flexible, be opportunistic, to stay inside the enemy's decision cycle, which means once the enemy moves, if he moves, to hammer him, keep hammering, pressure, the name of the game. Our CBS News coverage of the ground war offensive will continue in a moment, live from Saudi Arabia, so stay here with us. Now, the air-land battle doctrine, which is the book of the U.S. military, was designed to allow our forces to fight outnumbered and win in Europe. U.S. and allied forces are outnumbered in the whole theater if you take into account all of Iraq's forces, all of Saddam Hussein's forces, but in the areas right along the Saudi Arabian border with Kuwait and Iraq, the figures are believed to break down to about 500,000 plus for Saddam Hussein and his Iraqi army, perhaps as many as 700,000 if you count the forces at sea for the U.S. And its allies. So the hope is that the air-land battle doctrine will have a very good time in the desert and make it a short war based on a very quick attack designed for a quick victory. But Secretary of Defense Cheney said earlier in the evening, no one should get carried away with optimism. There can be some very difficult times and days ahead. Let's go to Bob Schieffer with our military consultants in New York. Robert?
Well, Dan, that is exactly what the top Marine over there, General Walter Boomer, has told his staff. He is quoted as saying, "I've had to caution my staff. The operation has gone almost too well so far. But hearing you report that the operation is going like clockwork, getting the reports from British officials and Kuwaiti officials, we thought we might talk about that a little bit here at the map with General Chris. General, why don't you explain to us what's happened here?"
Well, the initial reports they were getting in, Bob, are very favorable. It's been reported the 7th Corps is now 12 miles within on what has been described as a flanking movement. In the Marine area, they're some 18 miles in. In this area right in here, there have been 300 prisoners taken, 18 T-62, which are good tanks, killed already to date. They're beginning to approach the second lines of defense. So what we know now from these foreign publications, this operation is going very, very well.
Now, these, if I remember what you had said early on, General, maybe the toughest fight would not be along this first line, that perhaps this would not be where the best of Iraq's soldiers would be.
Exactly right, Bob. These frontline units are the ones from which the desertions have been taking place, and we've always questioned the morale of those units. What we have to watch now is what is known as the second echelon units. These are the units back here, armored and mechanized, which are not Republican Guards, but they're just a cut below. They're very good units and tough units, and we'll have to wait and see how they react.
General, let's talk about just what is going on the battlefield. The troops are there. We know the tanks are there. What is taking place right now?
Well, on this end, they obviously have done a pretty good job of clearing their way through the minefields, and they're bypassing, I suspect, any tough points of resistance, any of those really big fortifications that are holding out. This going right around them is slicing through them. On this end, I think they're probably rolling. It's a little bit more wide open down here. They're just outside the Iraqi defenses. They're probably moving pretty fast. By the end of this day, I don't know where they're going to be, but they're obviously rolling.
We have talked from time to time about what an enormous battle this is. What are there, 2,000 tanks, I suppose, along there?
I would say just in this group alone, there's about 2,000 tanks moving. And there's another 1,400 or so down in here.
Now, moving with the tanks are also armored personnel carriers, infantry is there. Engineer units, we've seen graphics of these so-called scissor bridges. Talk about how that works, or how does that work as they move along there?
Well, I suspect, Bob, at this point in time, you're seeing tanks and mechanized infantry moving out to clear the way. I don't think the big armored formations have quite cracked loose yet. When those guys go, they're going to roar north somewhere up in here. So this is the operation to clear the way, get the units in front out of the way, and those are probably mechanized, which have tanks with them, and soldiers riding in those armored personnel carriers, those Bradleys that you've seen, getting the things opened up.
Just a layman's question, General. We talk about this great movement in. Why not go right into Baghdad?
Baghdad? Well, Baghdad is what? About 360 some odd miles to the north. It's a city of 4 million people. It's got at least 2 big divisions up there. It's a hostile city. We have our hands full, I think, just taking care of the army here, never mind trying to do a march to Baghdad, Bob.
All right, General Chris. Well, that's it from here, Dan. Back to you.
Thanks, Bob. Every war brings out the noblest and the worst behavior in human beings. That's the way it is with war. In the rape of Kuwait, Saddam Hussein and his soldiers have showed the worst side. The U.S. and Allied forces have been admonished not to retaliate in kind to barbarous acts. We were in the field one day not too long ago and heard a U.S. commander say specifically to his troops, you have to be careful. We want you to be alert. Just because they're barbarous acts against you, don't engage in them. We can hope that in the heat of battle, the U.S. and Allied forces retain the moral high ground. Thus far, the indication is they have. Contrasted with what's going on in Kuwait, Kuwait is burning, it's been torched. The last count, maybe 300 oil wells and other oil facilities aflame. Confirmed reports of roundup of Kuwaiti citizens. For one thing, some of the Iraqis didn't want witnesses to the atrocities committed there. Now, our CBS News coverage of the ongoing ground war offensive around the Persian Gulf will continue in a moment, so stay in here with us.
This is CBS.
The new Tide is Ultra Tide.
Now I found something that works.
Ultra small, ultra intensified.
When I opened that box and saw that little teeny scoop, I said, no way. Dirt, grass, nastiness. Straight through the fabric.
For cleaning deep down inside, new Tide is ultra powerful. One little scoop cleans down to the fiber itself.
It's clean. Excellent.
The new Tide is Ultra Tide.
I've told people, my own friends, to try it.
Nobody beats Home Depot. Nobody. Home Depot will beat any price, any store, any identical item, any day. And low prices are just the beginning. Home Depot features quality Red Devil caulks in a great selection of colors. We also carry Formby's Furniture Facelift for wood that shines without refinishing.
When you're with us at Home Depot, you'll feel right at home.
You're watching CBS News' continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. From Saudi Arabia, here is Dan Rather.
From the U.S. and Allied side, from its point of view, so far so good in the launching of the ground war offensive, but it's still in the early stages. Here are the headlines of the hour. Operation Desert Storm enters what President Bush has called its final phase with the battle on the ground. The Pentagon puts the lid on all information from the front from the American side. The British, French, and Arab sources are still talking. The U.S. charges Iraq with last-minute atrocities inside Kuwait. After more than 5 weeks of a fierce war in the air, the ground war has finally begun. Arab and British sources say now that the Allied forces are as far as 18 miles inside Kuwait. They have attacked on at least 2 other fronts, and possibly an amphibious assault is underway. There are also British reports of an Allied incursion into southern Iraq. That's the one that General Chris and Bob Schieffer were talking about a moment ago, which is expected to be the main attack. There is almost no information available from the U.S. military. Understandably, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney says that the Pentagon is going to be silent.
When it is safe to begin discussing the operation, we will do so in as much detail as we prudently can. But for